It is a Wednesday morning in April. A completely ordinary morning. People are arriving at work. Parents are dropping children off at the daycare on the second floor of a government building downtown. Nobody is afraid. Nobody has any reason to be. And then, at exactly 9:02 a.m., the ground shakes. One explosion. One truck. One man who had been planning this for months. 168 people who never made it home. This is the story of Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bomber. A man who genuinely believed he was a patriot. A man who went to his execution still believing he was right. And that, honestly, is the most terrifying thing about all of this. Let us go from the very beginning. Timothy James McVeigh was born on April 23, 1968, in Lockport, New York. He grew up in the small town of Pendleton, raised mostly by his father after his parents divorced when he was 10. He was quiet, sharp, and obsessed with two things from a very young age: guns and computers. His grandfather introduced him to firearms, and by his teenage years he was spending his own money on them. He was not, by his own account, a troubled child. He had friends. He played sports. In his senior year of high school, his classmates voted him most talkative as a joke, because he barely spoke. He described his childhood, years later, as ordinary. But something was taking shape underneath all of that quiet. A belief that power is always abused. That the strong always crush the weak. He would later trace it back to being bullied in school. Being the skinny kid, the one they dragged into bathrooms, the one who was at the mercy of people bigger than him. He fixated on that feeling. He never forgot it. And eventually, he decided the biggest bully of all was the United States federal government. After high school, McVeigh enlisted in the Army. And here is where his story takes a turn that surprises most people. He was exceptional. He rose to the rank of sergeant. He served in the Gulf War as a gunner on a Bradley fighting vehicle and performed well enough under fire to receive the Army Commendation Medal and the Bronze Star. For the first time in his life, Timothy McVeigh had found a place where he was not the weak one. He had found purpose. He had found identity. And that something was war. But the Gulf War also changed him in ways that were harder to see. He watched the destruction of Iraqi infrastructure. He watched civilians die. He came home from the desert quietly asking whether the people making decisions in Washington actually cared about the human cost of what they were ordering. He applied for the Army Special Forces. He made it through the physical requirements without trouble. But on the second day of the 21-day selection course, he withdrew. He told the other recruits he had injured his ankle. In a letter to his superiors, he wrote that he simply was not physically ready. He had been in the desert for months. He was not in the shape the course demanded. He left. That was it. The military, the one place where he had found purpose and belonging, was done with him. He was honorably discharged in 1991. And the drift that followed was slow, but total. No stable work. No direction. A man with enormous amounts of anger, enormous amounts of time, and an ideology that was waiting to give both of them somewhere to go. After leaving the Army, McVeigh began drifting across America. Gun shows gave him income and a steady stream of people who believed what he was starting to believe, that the federal government had declared war on ordinary American citizens. He was reading extremist materials. He became fixated on a novel called The Turner Diaries, a fictional story about an armed revolution against the U.S. government. He did not read it like fiction. He read it like a manual. But it was two real events that pushed him from ideology to action. Ruby Ridge and Waco. In September 1994, he began actively planning the attack. Over the next 6 to 7 months, he and his former Army buddy Terry Nichols built a bomb. McVeigh drove the operation. They rented a Ryder truck. Nichols assisted with planning and construction. A third man, Michael Fortier, was brought into their circle. Fortier knew the full plan in advance. His wife Lori helped McVeigh laminate a fake driver's license under the name Robert Kling, which he used to rent the truck. McVeigh chose the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City specifically because it housed the regional offices of the ATF and other federal agencies he held directly responsible for Waco. He chose April 19th because it was the exact second anniversary of the end of the Waco siege. He also chose it because it fell on the 220th anniversary of the battles of Lexington and Concord, the first shots of the American Revolution. He was not hiding from the symbolism. He was counting on it. In his mind, he was not a terrorist. He was a soldier firing the first shot of a new revolution. McVeigh had been staying at the Dreamland Motel in Junction City, Kansas, under the alias Robert Kling. Days earlier, he and Nichols had driven to Oklahoma City and parked a yellow 1977 Mercury Marquis several blocks from the Murrah building to serve as his getaway car. Then they removed the license plate and returned to Kansas. On the morning of April 19th, McVeigh drove the Ryder truck through downtown Oklahoma City in rush-hour traffic. He pulled into the drop-off zone at the front of the Murrah building, climbed out, locked the door, and lit 2 separate timed fuses. Then he put in his earplugs, walked 2 blocks to his getaway car, and sat down. At 9:02 a.m., the bomb detonated. The blast destroyed the entire north face of the Murrah building instantly. 9 floors collapsed into each other. Every car in the immediate radius was thrown or incinerated. Glass shattered in buildings over a mile away. People felt the explosion 55 miles from Oklahoma City. 168 people were killed. 684 more were injured. 19 of the dead were children, most of them in the America's Kids Daycare Center on the 2nd floor. A rescue worker was later struck and killed by falling debris during the recovery operation. More than 300 surrounding buildings were damaged or destroyed. The financial damage came to an estimated $652 million. McVeigh later said he had not known there was a daycare center in the building. His accomplice Nichols said they both knew and did not care. More than 12,000 volunteers and rescue workers arrived in the hours and days that followed. The search and recovery operation lasted 2 full weeks. McVeigh had a plan for getting away. Drive north, stay low, disappear. He made it 90 minutes before it was over. Oklahoma Highway Patrol Trooper Charlie Hanger was driving south on Interstate 35, about 80 miles from Oklahoma City, when he passed a yellow 1977 Mercury Marquis going the other direction. No front license plate. He turned around. When he approached the window, he spotted a bulge under McVeigh's jacket. McVeigh told him it was a gun. Trooper Hanger arrested him for driving without plates and carrying a concealed weapon, and drove him to the county jail in Perry, Oklahoma. McVeigh sat in that cell while every television in America was showing footage of the search for the Oklahoma City bomber. Back at the scene, FBI investigators found a rear axle buried deep in the wreckage. Despite surviving the center of a blast powerful enough to level a 9-story building, the vehicle identification number was still readable. They traced it to a Ryder rental agency in Junction City, Kansas. Staff helped create a composite sketch of the man who rented the truck under the name Robert Kling. Agents showed the sketch around town. The manager of the Dreamland Motel recognized it immediately. The guest register confirmed the name, Tim McVeigh. One database search later, they discovered he had been sitting in a county jail 80 miles north for 90 minutes after the explosion. The government he wanted to destroy had caught him before he even changed his shoes. Terry Nichols surrendered in Kansas 2 days later. Michael Fortier cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence and was eventually sentenced to 12 years in prison. Nichols was sentenced to life. The trial was moved from Oklahoma to Denver so that a fair jury could actually be found. The FBI investigation, code-named Ockbomb, became one of the largest in American history. Over 28,000 interviews. More than 43,000 leads. Close to 1 billion pieces of information reviewed. The physical evidence weighed 3.5 tons. On June 2, 1997, Timothy McVeigh was convicted on all 11 federal counts. On June 13, the jury recommended death. The judge agreed. He appealed. But in December 2000, he instructed his attorneys to stop. He set his own execution date. No more appeals. He was ready. There was one final complication. 9 days before the scheduled execution, it emerged that the FBI had failed to hand over more than 3,000 documents to McVeigh's defense team during the original trial. His execution was briefly paused. His attorneys reviewed every document. Their conclusion, none of it would have changed the verdict. The execution date was reset. On June 11, 2001, Timothy McVeigh was executed by lethal injection at the Federal Correctional Complex in Terre Haute, Indiana. It was the first federal execution in the United States since 1963, nearly 4 decades earlier. 30 witnesses watched through a glass partition. 300 more victims and family members gathered in Oklahoma City to watch via a closed-circuit feed. They had waited 6 years for this moment. McVeigh made no spoken statement. He did not say a single word. What he did was hand the prison warden a handwritten copy of the Victorian poem Invictus by William Ernest Henley to be distributed to those present. A poem about defiance, about an unconquerable soul, about being the master of your own fate. He died with his eyes open, staring at the ceiling, pronounced dead at 7:14 in the morning. He was 33 years old. He never expressed remorse. When asked directly about the 168 people he killed, he called them collateral damage and moved on. 3 months after McVeigh's execution, the September 11th attacks happened, and the conversation about terrorism shifted almost entirely to foreign threats. McVeigh's story faded from the front pages. But it never stopped being relevant. Because Timothy McVeigh was not a foreigner. He was not mentally ill in a clinical sense. He was not chaotic or disorganized. He was calm, methodical, decorated for his service, and completely certain that what he was doing was right. He believed he was the good guy. He went to his death believing he was the good guy. The Oklahoma City bombing forced a conversation that America had been slow to have. That radicalization does not need a foreign passport. It does not look like one thing. It does not announce itself. It grows quietly inside people who look completely ordinary. It feeds on real grievances, twisted over years into something unrecognizable. And when it finally acts, it does not discriminate. 168 empty chairs. One for every person who showed up to an ordinary Wednesday and never came home. Timothy McVeigh wanted to start a revolution. What he actually did was remind a country, and the world, that the most dangerous person in the room is not always the stranger. Sometimes it is the person who grew up here, who served here, and who decided, slowly and quietly, that destruction was the only language worth speaking. That is the story of Timothy McVeigh. Subscribe to Murder Mystery for new stories every week. Every case we cover is real. Every detail is verified. And every story is told the way it deserves to be told. Hit the bell so you never miss one.